Tatsmewi, welcome. Good evening. Good to see everybody. Let's see. I love this. This is actually by native artist Marcus Ammerman. It's in the Portland Art Museum's collection. It's really a 9-inch by 12-inch small beadwork of from the early 90s, and I love it because it reminds us that we're still here. We never left, really, but it's an honor to share a little bit this evening in our brief time of what the Native American Indigenous community is up to in the Portland area, and a lot of exciting things going on. But I want to start and invite folks to ask, what does it mean to be indigenous to a place? To think about that. Everybody recognize where this is? You can just say it. What we call Ngyuen, the big river, what some call Columbia. A lot of that is still very much intact, although my dad remembers going through here as a kid when they were building the old highway from Idaho. The river ran faster before it was dammed. This is what it looks like in the last half century, but a changed landscape, but much of it's still intact, so we can ask ourselves, how does the land inform who we are? We often, as humans, want to inform the land and tell it how it should be, or turn it into something else, but from an indigenous perspective, we're looking at how the land informs who we are. Does anyone recognize this place? I have to say it's from a Nez Perce calendar, so that's a clue. What? Go ahead and say it. Yeah, it's the Wallowas, part of our traditional homeland. As Native people, we have these boundaries today that were imposed, but it's part of our traditional homeland. As such, the Wallowa Lake is sacred. We do not recreate in it. So nature, in some ways, as Disneyland, is not often a good fit with indigenous communities globally. And so part of our work is to, we're not against recreating. I kayak, I do a lot of stuff, but I don't do it here. And so these sacred sites, recognizing their role, they have their own entity. It's why we don't name them after humans. So Ngyuen, the big river, they have their own standing, and there are big relatives. And so we can think about how the land informs who we are, and here we are salmon people. If you're living here, you are in Salmon Nation. And it's why we strive so hard to make sure our relative, the salmon, keeps coming back. And especially in the city of Portland, where we still have some salmon runs that we're working on with Portland Parks, Metro, Bureau of Environmental Services, Army Corps of Engineers, and others to kind of reclaim, re-indigenize the urban landscape for food, medicine, ceremony, and healthy lifeways. Okay. When we talk about land, we often skip this part, and maybe it's the instructor, the educator in me, but at Portland State University in the Indigenous Nations Studies Department, we now have a new major, the first in Oregon. It just started this last fall, 2018. Yes, it's exciting. And part of what we find we're doing a lot, whether that's in the classroom or with government agencies, is sharing our history. And some of the terms like the Doctrine of Discovery. If you're working on land and you're working with people in the United States or anywhere else on the globe, how many of you are familiar with the Doctrine of Discovery? Okay, yes. So the Doctrine of Discovery was the papal bull of 1493, and I won't go on too much because we only have about 10 minutes, but But it was the interesting date there, 1493, from the Pope, who said, any land found or discovered that did not have Christianized people there were not entitled to be there. They were like a tree or a deer or a rabbit. And so whether you look at South America or Africa or Australia, that papal bull is still on the books. And so as indigenous people, we were immediately displaced with the era of colonization. And so if we look at land, when we talk about reclaiming land or being on the land, we have to look, how did this become unceded land, and what is the U.S.'s history in that? In fact, all of North America. Manifest Destiny, that's another really big one. How many of you have heard of Manifest Destiny? Yeah, more people hear about that. And so that's another building on the Doctrine of Discovery, basically said there was inherent right for Christianized folks to bring the land under the yoke of the plow and to dominate. And so we have an industrialized landscape in the 21st century. That part of the work we're involved in with the Native American Community Advisory Council, the Portland Parks, also with Metro and the Bureau of Environmental Services to kind of heal and restore and reclaim an industrialized past of the last 150 years here in the West. And so part of doing that is understanding these terms and these concepts that still impact a lot of policy. And so I won't go into the rest of these, but you can, I strongly suggest, and I have to say, Metro has invited us to, for the past year and a half, to provide Indigenous cultural education training to staff, soon with BES as well. But just to kind of share some of these concepts, sovereignty, as tribal people, sovereignty, we have a government-to-government relationship with the state and the feds. Portland is the first city to have an agreement with the tribes that have historically called Portland home to check in with each other and have a relationship. It's very exciting. We can look at treaties. Those are big. Your eyes kind of roll to the back of your head, but they're really important when you're working with land and water. Relocation, that's why we have a very large Native population here in the West. One-way tickets from tribes and reservations in the Midwest and back east to the West Coast. Portland is one of those relocation cities in the 50s. Termination is exactly what it sounds like. Most of the tribes that are federally recognized today in Oregon were terminated in the 50s, not that long ago. That was, if you look at the tribes that were terminated, those are the tribes that are sitting on lots of forest land and a lot of other desirable land. Good news is restoration in the 70s and 80s, as recently as 1989. The tribes in Oregon did all of the paperwork and all the legal work to be federally restored. Today, we look at restoration and resurgence, and some of those examples, we still look at all the rest too, but today what I'm going to focus on. I'm not going to read all of these, but just a little bit of the demographic. I mentioned at the bottom here the City of Portland's proclamation to work together. You can see some of our partners, and as the Native American Community Advisory Council to Portland Parks, Metro, that keeps expanding. We do a lot of our work. These are the 9, if you're not familiar. Some of our partners, our guiding values. These, over the course of the work we've been doing, are part of what informs the work we're doing. I find that people are also very interested in applying it to the projects and the attitude and respect they bring to working on land and working with the people. Getting outside, The Native American community has the same statistics that Jorge shared, high mortality rate in all of those fields. We have a Native Youth Suicide Prevention Program at PSU in partnership with Tribes of Oregon and the Native American Rehabilitation Association. You might be thinking, what has this got to do with gardens? But we don't have a word for gardens, but we are very connected to land. And it's heal the land, heal the people. When we talk about getting back on the land, it's an act of reconciliation. It's an act of reclaiming our health. It's an act of remembering our ancestors and our relatives. And the relatives aren't just the two-legged people. The relatives, the big relatives, are these big bodies of water, these big trees, as Moe began with her beautiful poem. These are the big relatives who are holding the energy and waiting. So getting back out, this is actually Tryon Creek State Park. These children are all 30 years old now, and they're all in our, back in the day, Portland Public School Title VII Indian Education Program, 3rd through 5th graders. Many of them are working in parks in Metro today. Sharing some of the work we're doing, again, sharing the story. There's a lot of interest in what we're doing here in partnerships to collaborate on big projects like the, well, here you can see some of the partners and how those groups come together and bringing all of that expertise, all of that energy together. Community engagement that brought together, this is just one, and I'm not showing all of them, but through community engagement on behalf of Cully Park's Native Gathering Garden, for almost 7 years we did community engagement, and the community kept developing building frameworks of what will continue to guide that work. This is a 26-acre landfill. And how many of you have been out to Cully Park? All right. So we started with 1 acre, and now we're hearing that it may expand to more than that in the southwestern quadrant of that. Again, people talk about community engagement and listening to elders, listening to youth, listening to all of those in between. And these are things that over the time we hope to be able to build out there. Maybe there'll be a plank house. DEQ was great. They said, don't give up. There's methane gas and you can't have any fire there right now. It would all explode. But someday it will be through composting. And it was great. It was a great partnership with folks like Metro. But we can see here reconciliation. For us to be on the land, whether it's Cully Park or Westmoreland Park, after they removed the duck pond. When we talk about our ancestors and the people, it's reconciliation. We can't move forward without that. And so we're excited by these opportunities. It couldn't be built for several years, but the elders said, well, let's get out there. So we started with offering blessings and seed scattering. This was our first one. We've done 4 so far, and we continue to do that. I want to tell folks, too, we did not Photoshop in that rainbow down below. That was really there that day, and this is it before. If you've been out, this is what it looked like before. Here's overhead of our area with ceremonial gathering spaces there, and then community co-maintenance, tending the land, using indigenous practices. This is going to be managed very differently. This is also going to be a place for gathering together, but also gathering the berries and other medicinals and edibles on the site once it fills in. Oh, and I wanted to point out we're getting ready to have our 6th annual Westmoreland Park Salmon Celebration. That was another collaboration with Parks, Metro, and Army Corps of Engineers to remove a duck pond in Westmoreland Park in southeast Portland. And the salmon, when Colonel Jose Aguilar came out with the Army Corps of Engineers, we had a lot of other electeds on our little stage, tribal welcoming, the Bruno family fixing salmon every year like they do. But Colonel Jose Aguilar came to me and said, Judy, we do these projects all the time. And he said, sometimes we hope in 5 years, maybe 7 years, salmon will come back. Sometimes they don't. He said, but I was just over there, and there's a salmon this big spawning. And we both teared up. And it's a time of reconciliation. These are partners that we haven't historically had strong relationships with. And so Metro's Quamish Prairie, it's become a long-term commitment. We dig our traditional camas. We'll be out there again in a couple of weeks checking to see what the water's like. When the camas will be able to be dug again. If you haven't had camas, there they are with the outer skin peeled. They're one of our very important first foods. So parks, it's an edible landscape, but we're not eating it all up. We're having to clean it up so we can begin to taste and honor these ancestral foods again. We've also brought back our traditional pit roasting on Metro's site. They're an incredible partner. We'll be out again. The young women, the young men are learning to dig with our traditional digging sticks to dig the bulb up. And then this is just a list. This is a piece that was just installed in the South Waterfront Park a couple of years ago by Warm Springs artist Lillian Pitt. And when Lily and I were down there before she did it, I said, well, there's Ross Island and eagles are nesting there. And she said, oh, Judy, River Guardian, and we're going to do a River Guardian. So Lillian, we were so fortunate with Lillian as an elder to do this River Guardian, to look over the people and to look over the river and call everybody home back again. And so just some of the partnerships. Katsiyael, thank you. Thankful for you. That's it.